Welcome to Real Estate and Murder, a podcast about real estate and murder.
I am Amy Brockbank.
And I am Sarah Brager. We are both licensed real estate agents in the state of Utah who have a common fascination with true crime.
We are here to tell you stories of murder amongst the real estate community. It might be an agent, it might be a client, it might be an undetected serial killer.
When it comes to real estate crimes, some are predators and some are prey.
We just want to issue a trigger warning. The content of these cases can be difficult to hear from time to time, and please listen with care.
Well, hello again, everybody.
Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Amy, and hi, Danny. So, Amy, we're going to get into part 2 of the Los Feliz mansion murders, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, part 1, we talked a lot about the area, the community, the local market statistics, like we always do, right?
Yeah,
Griffith Park, Griffith,
Yeah.
which is funny because in part 1, you were like, Griffith, that's impossible to forget. And you're like, Griffin, right? It's Griffin. No, it's Griffith. So yeah, we talked about a lot of the lead up stuff into really the main part of the story, which is what we're going to do now.
By the way, I did read, I forgot to mention it last episode, but I did read that the reason why he donated the land was because he couldn't find a buyer. So maybe he wasn't as generous as we all give him credit for.
I mean, he was definitely a little bit crazy because he tried to shoot his wife in the face.
Yeah.
I mean, not tried because he
did.
did,
Yeah,
but she
just
didn't pass
die.
away from the injury. So anyway, hey, okay, Amy, tell me all about 2475 Glendower Place.
Yeah, so on June 23rd, 1920, Harry and his wife Florence, the shoemakers, commissioned Harry Warner to design their Los Feliz Heights mansion. At the time, they had been they were in the produce industry. And anyway, they were kind of like getting ready to retire, even though they were in their, late 30s, mid 30s. I don't know.
I guess maybe that was midlife back then, though.
Yeah. Well, I think when you have so much money and then you're just like, okay, I'm just ready to. I mean, I would love to retire at 35.
Oh,
I would
for
have
sure.
loved it.
Yeah.
So
Wasn't our luck. Okay, so they're in the food industry.
yeah, mainly. I mean, I don't know that we want to go down this road, but they did the produce. And
I mean, how much of this road is there to go down? What do you know
it's
about
like
their
the
produce
Pacific
business?
Produce Company? Like, yeah, no, I do. They were up in like Washington. Like, I know. I deep dove into these guys.
I think you mentioned to me casually that they were like involved in
it's called the
transporting like citrus and stuff.
Yeah, it was the Pacific Fruit and Produce Company.
So they were probably
lemons and oranges and
they were probably part of originating like a mass transfer of food across the United States.
And the company did kind of relocate down in California, not just where they were at, but they were mainly getting ready to retire.
Okay, so they're going to build their dream house.
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometime in 1921, they actually get to move in. So, I mean, for the technology that we have now to build a new construction home from start to finish, it takes anywhere from 6 to 18 months, depending on the complexity, the
supply chain.
Yeah, all of that stuff. So for them to have it within that year time frame in 1920 was pretty impressive, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's a 5,000 square foot house. So that's huge.
And there's a lot of architectural details. It was a very custom house, which usually takes longer in our day, but,
Very cool.
Anyway. So on July 1st, 1928, Florence Shoemaker, she's 41. She dies. Guess where she dies, Sarah?
I'm assuming it's at the Los Feliz mansion.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I see why you were bringing up their 30s, because she died at age 41, which is really young. Okay.
It is young.
Okay, now I get it.
Yeah. And then just 27 days later, on July 28th, Harry dies.
Wow.
And he is also 41. And, well, this is where we've talked about the information that's out there and the differing information. There's other sources that have his death on July 23rd instead of the 28th. But regardless, within a 20-day-ish period, he also dies. And last episode, we had talked about disparaging properties and what happens when death occurs in this house. But this is basically the start of these mysterious deaths.
Yeah.
I guess that happen.
Mysterious, consistent deaths.
Yeah. So it turns out Harry and Florence, there was not anything sinister involved with their deaths. She had died of heart disease at 41, and he had died of pneumonia. And
So they didn't eat their vegetables?
Well,
is that what you're telling me?
This is what's crazy, because Los Angeles County has this whole record of who dies on what date. Like, it's really, I wonder if they still do it, but you'd have the month where it says July.
I'm pretty sure they keep death records.
Yeah, no, but it was handwritten.
Sure.
You know, and it was like this ledger, and it was just,
right.
And they would have like July 1st, and they would just name a couple people, and then it would move on, and it was just in order. And anyway, it makes me wonder, because it was in July and they died so closely together, if maybe there was some sort of illness that they had, that the autopsy showed that she had died of heart disease, but it may have been a mitigating factor with her, you know.
Did they do autopsies in the 1920s?
I mean, a coroner. And I don't know.
I don't know
what kind of intense.
That was a legit question. I don't know. In 1920s,
maybe if someone in our audience knows.
Yeah, sure. DM us. Tell us. Okay. So the original owners, within just a few years of constructing this beautiful mansion, have now both passed away within a month of each other.
7 years.
Okay.
Of living in the house. They have an estate manager, and he lists it, and he's tried to reach out to 15 different real estate firms with no success. But you've got to keep in mind, this is 1928. So what's going on in the country, Sarah, in 1928?
You're headed straight into the Depression.
Yeah.
The Great Depression.
Yeah. So to have this mega mansion in the hills of Los Angeles, it's going to sit for a minute.
Sure.
So he's not able to sell it. So as a result, he has several tenants kind of move into the house for a little bit. And there's a lot of famous people that live into the house that are more involved with like the film industry. And
makes sense given the area.
Yeah. So there's back and forth for several years. There's a lot of these people that are living in it. And then in 1930, Welford and his wife, Sarah, their last name is Beaton with a B, and their son, Donald, began renting. So they're renting from the shoemaker's estate manager. And Wilford, his son was in high school age, and he was also involved in the film industry. He did a lot of playwrights and different things, and his son actually helped him in his business and would do a lot of the writing. And they have a pretty rich history, but before they had moved into the house, his son had sustained an injury while playing tennis. And they didn't really think it was like that big of a deal. It was just, I think nowadays it wouldn't have been a big deal. But their son dies in the house on May 3rd, 1931. And the saddest thing, besides the son dying, is he ended up dying of an infection due to his tennis injury.
How sad.
He
died so
sad.
Young.
So young.
Exercise is so risky.
Side note, you guys.
Could result in anything. What are you laughing at? Go ahead.
No, my derailing of my thought.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, speaking of exercise, and I genuinely want to know this. Why did Richard Simmons die before Gene Simmons? Like, no, for real. I was asking my doctor about this. I was like,
You
you're
asked
telling
your
me
doctor
I
about the Simmons?
I did, because every time you go into the doctor, they're like, how many days a week do you exercise? Like, what kind of lifestyle do you
And
have?
that brought that up for you?
Well, I was like, does exercise really help live longer?
Okay, but
This is another
Amy.
podcast.
Okay, but just a thought. Like, Richard Simmons was famous for his exercise videos in like what, the 80s, right? I
Yeah.
don't know that he like continued that trend for the rest of his life. Also, he was a recluse. Like an absolute recluse. Like people thought he was dead for like 20 years. Did you know that?
Yeah.
That he was just
There
like
was always
hiding out?
rumors. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, like he completely vanished himself off the face
Yeah.
of his social world anyway. And so maybe reclusiveness and being alone and emotionally shut down is much more unhealthy for you than being
A rock
a
star.
rock star living your best life. I don't know.
Anyway.
We're fine.
Now our audience knows how we really feel about
I
diet
should
and
say you're
exercise.
asking your doctor about it. Oh my gosh.
I
Okay.
mean, anything to justify
Tennis
my Dr.
injuries
Pepper.
cause death.
Yeah. So after Donald had passed away on May 3rd, 1931, his dad would file bankruptcy just a couple months later. He never recovered from the loss of his son. I think losing a child would be hard anyway, but because his son was such an integral part of his professional relationship, I just think it was hard for him to bounce back. But anyway, that family ended up moving out of the house
Okay.
in July of 1931. And it didn't really sell until June 1st, 1932. And John and Beverly Stauffer, and he was director emeritus of Stauffer Chemicals, which I don't know what that is, but anyway, and their son Jack would live in the house for 20 years.
Okay.
Nothing sinister or
Cleanest track record so far.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Nobody
then,
played tennis.
Nope. Yeah. Well, they maybe did, but anyway, when they passed away, their estate, they donated the house to Whittier College.
Okay.
And it stayed within the college estate for a few years. It was left vacant. They sold it their estate donated it in 1954. And then in 1956, we have the Perelsons who bought the house. And this was Harold, his wife Lillian, their daughter Judy, Joel, daughter Debbie.
Okay.
Anyway.
Family of 5.
Family of 5. They purchased the home for the college. Guess how much they purchased this house for, sir?
Oh my gosh. I mean, despite all the deep research we did, I don't remember.
$30,000.
Okay, now I do remember because we calculated that in today's math.
Yeah.
Right? And the estimated value of $30,000 now was around $300,000. And we were saying like, both that's still an absolute steal
Of a deal for a 5,000 square foot mansion.
Right. Which was just tough to sell. Like,
Yeah.
there's something about this house that wasn't attracting multiple buyers or getting enough interest in the real estate market to have it be moving quickly through its transitions.
Yeah, I mean, we all have those houses in our neighborhood that seem to be more transient than others, meaning that they're changing hands.
They're turned over more often.
More frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't you feel like that in certain neighborhoods? You're like, oh my gosh, that house was just for sale just not too long ago.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Or someone else was moving in. I don't know.
Totally.
Anyway, this just happened to be this house. So, we're going to fast forward a little bit
Okay.
with the Perelsons.
Okay.
So, rumor has it that on Christmas Eve in 1959, that Harold Perelson goes in and kills his wife. He then goes in and attacks his oldest daughter, Judy,
Right.
with a hammer.
Right.
She wakes up during the attack,
Mm-hmm.
screams. The kids wake up. They all flee the house. The police are called, and Harold took acid in the bathroom next to his murdered wife's room, and they die.
Right.
And the reason why I say rumor has it was because we're going to fast forward a little bit to the year 2000, where a man named Steve Kolumsky, I don't know if we're pronouncing his last name right. I'm sorry, Steve. We'll just call you Steve the rest of the episode.
It was a good try.
Was working on as a house painter.
Okay.
In the area. And the Los Feliz, we've mentioned before that the house sits up on a hill.
Right.
And the window of the house, I think it's a really cool house. I love the architectural detail of it. Other people have stated that it's a very creepy, sinister, like the house is looking down on you in this neighborhood. But in the 1920s, when houses were being built, a lot of things were taken into consideration. Privacy is one of them. So it was very odd that this house that has basically a second to main level window.
Right.
It doesn't go all the way up to the third story.
Sure.
But this window is just huge.
Mm-hmm.
No window coverings. And you can see the staircase through the window from the road.
Right.
And so for an era of time where privacy was the number one issue, it's very surprising that the staircase would be shown from the street view. And if you look at pictures, I think it's a cool picture.
Yeah, you guys should definitely Google, like just search for an image of the house. It'll pop right up and you can see the architecture that we're talking about. There's a lot of pictures online from the front of the house.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Steve is in the neighborhood. He's painting.
Okay.
And he looks over and he sees this house and he sees the staircase, the window. Now, the window is yellowed and we're not sure if it's because the window tinting or the sun fade over time has kind of turned the glass yellow. But regardless, it's this very yellow glass and you can see the staircase. So he goes and he asks the neighbor about this house. And the neighbor tells him that it's this really tragic story, that a family was murdered, a husband killed his wife in the house, tried to murder his daughter, and the house has sat vacant since this time.
So the house is clearly neglected. It catches Steve's attention and he wants to know more.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the fact, and the neighbor even says, no one has lived there since this time, which you never find that happening.
Right.
You know, usually if something happens, they either demolish the property or people have bought it and remodeled and moved in.
Yeah, because at that point, like in this part of the storyline, that would be a 40-year absence of someone living there. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the neighbor says, if you go up to the house, it's like time capsuled. So Steve decides he's going to drive up to this house. He's like, I got to check this out.
Right.
And he goes up to the property and there is at this point, like, the original house didn't have these gates around it, but the gates have been added over time. And so he gets into the property and walks up. And Steve tells everyone that when he peers through the window, there's the 1950s furniture. You can see couches, like a TV. He says there's Christmas trees with wrapped presents still under the Christmas tree and all of this stuff. So Steve takes it upon himself to drive up a bunch of friends.
Yeah.
You know, and he waits till late at night. He's like, you've got to go up to this house. You've got to come see this house. You've got this. This is just amazing what ends up happening with this house. And he feeds his friends these stories on the way up, which creates what is known as an urban legend.
Yeah. All this hype. Like all of a sudden, it's like the cool thing to do to go check out this house because it's empty.
Well, it's a
and
dare.
No one's going to stop you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a dare. Exactly.
Are you brave enough to go peek through the windows?
Right,
Tell me what
which-
you see.
Just a heads up. I am not. Like, that would not be my activity of choice.
Surprises me.
What? Why?
I don't know. I just think that you would be like down for. Sarah's down for anything.
Hauntings are super different than like.
You wouldn't go check out a
murders, right?
house?
I mean, I'm sure that I would. I don't know that I would give like if you look at this trail of urban legends
Yeah.
online, like there are tons of videos of people like YouTubing themselves still to this day
Yeah.
to go check out this mansion very briefly. Like who has time for that? I don't know. But I mean, maybe if like a friend, like maybe if you called me and you're like, we have to go check out this house because we're podcasting about murders, I would totally do it with you. But anyway, Steve is like self-admittedly one that likes to hype up people.
He
and
totally
stories,
does.
right?
And
Because
he's
we're
an
getting this
embellisher.
information actually from Steve himself.
Yes. Steve is
Okay.
Steve is giving interviews. Like
Yeah.
he is feeding into this narrative of
He's creating it and feeding it.
yeah.
This is his Tamagotchi.
Yeah,
He's
I think
keeping
in my
this story
20s
alive.
I totally would have gone at night.
Why
Now-
in your 20s?
Well, because you're not afraid of anything in your 20s. You're just like, sure, like whatever. Like you're not thinking something you're going to get
Whatever.
murdered.
It's just because your bedtime's at 8.
Yeah.
Now that, like,
I wish. I tried to go to bed at 7 last night,
Yeah.
you guys. It didn't
Well,
work
okay,
out.
it's starting to get dark now. Like, we're in
Yeah.
September, right? So it starts to get dark earlier. And I swear, like, that's just my brain's signal to be
Yeah.
like,
I'm
wrap
ready
it
to.
up. The day's over. Oh my gosh, it's 7. Anyway.
Yeah, no, now I would be like, yeah, I'll go check out the house, but we're going to do it during the day.
Oh, for sure.
You
in
know.
daylight.
So in 2009, Steve actually gives an interview to the Los Angeles Times journalist Bob Poole.
Okay.
This whole thing about this, because by then it's been 9 years. He's taken lots of people up there. They have also taken people up there.
Yeah.
There's this whole,
Cultural phenomenon that's going on.
yeah, and it's a quiet neighborhood. There's not, we should mention to our audience, there aren't any streetlights, or there wasn't at the time, around this neighborhood. And you don't see mansions that are unkept in the Hollywood Hills.
No, I mean, we talked about the community and neighborhood in part 1, but like these are large homes in an exclusive area, just inside the Hollywood area of Los Angeles, basically. And so they're private, quiet streets with homeowners that are like very seriously invested in caring for their properties and for their homes.
Yeah, and we talked about the Innes house,
Yeah.
which is the house on Haunted Hill. Vincent
Right.
Price starred in it. That movie was filmed right around the time, within a matter of months, of the Perelsons dying at their house.
I think, yeah, the movie was filmed in like 1950, but the Ennis house you can see right above the Los Feliz mansion. So it actually sits right above it. So, I mean, that even makes a little more sense to me that it's kind of a cultural phenomenon, again, for people to go check out this site because you have this, famous Los Feliz mansion where there was a murder and the house has now been vacant for 40 years and it's haunted. And then right above it that you can visually see is the house on Haunted Hill.
Yeah. So in Steve's interview, Bob has since admitted that he never went up to the house. He just took Steve's word for it. He talked to a couple other people that were like, oh, this is what I saw. He just wrote the story up.
Sure.
And at the time the Perelsons died, the news was national news because it was a prominent doctor, tries to kill his wife, or kills his wife, but
Successfully tries.
Yeah. No, tries to kill his daughter. But, and so, but Bob Poole's story in the Los Angeles Times makes it go really viral,
Sure.
which creates this culture that follows these urban legends, and, the phenomenon just explodes.
Totally.
So now we're going to separate the fact from the fiction, Sarah.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a little bit, just a few more details that I had heard from multiple sources because we went down both routes, me and you did.
Yeah.
We went down the factual route for our research, and then we also looked at the urban legend and the story behind it and stuff like that. But people who have gone up to the house to see it on a dare and taken videos and what are saying a wide variety of different things that they're seeing in the house, right?
Yeah.
Like the shadow of a woman, the Christmas tree and the presents, cans of SpaghettiOs, magazines, like TV from 1950. Like people are seeing all kinds of different things in this house, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, let's separate the fact from fiction now, because if you really find the true story, which takes a lot of research and a lot of time and clicking beyond the easy YouTube videos and links and stuff like that, you'll get to the actual truth, which is significantly different.
Yeah. And I deep dove into, people's histories and army records and just deep dove into stuff like that.
People's citrus businesses.
Yeah, I know, right? Their family history, all of these things. But the podcast, A Cloudy Day Pictures, which we always cite our sources, but they did a phenomenal job digging into the factual data. They dug through the files of the Los Angeles coroner's reports and different things like that, where we're not boots on the ground. We take other people's research and kind of, do our own too, but we're not boots on the ground.
Yeah, they did a fantastic podcast called The Los Feliz Mansion Murders.
Yeah.
And it's like 7 parts, right?
Yeah,
6 or 7 parts. And the 2 or 3 researchers that worked on it took 7 years total to do all this research. And so we did draw a lot of information from them, but that's the time and effort it took to really get to the bottom of all of this, right?
Yeah, and Bob Poole did take some of her information because she had created on Ancestry.com, you can create family trees and all of these things so he had asked for, she had found recent residential records and things like that from the kids of the Perelsons when she was doing her research.
Right. Yeah, so they did an excellent job. So just a little bit about the Perelsons then. So Harold and Lillian both were actually born on the East Coast, and they were married when they were young, and then they came all the way over to California with their 3 children, like you mentioned, and started their life over here. So Harold Perelson was a doctor. I don't know what his actual educational degree was, but he was in the medical field, and he had a pretty extensive history, career history in the medical industry, which goes all up and down, everywhere from researching and writing papers on medical subjects that are still referenced and used to this day, to the invention of, medical supplies and stuff.
Yeah. To me, when I was reading through some of the things that he was working on with patients, because again, you have access to patient history because HIPAA laws weren't a thing back then. So doctors just had stuff laying around anywhere. And it's been kind of passed down and you can see stuff, but they, I want to say he was more research. I want to say he just thought, oh, this next thing is going to be a breakthrough. He wanted to be that revolutionary into the medical fields where one of his findings would help perpetuate a lasting change with whatever.
Yeah, I mean, an invention that he originated, I don't know that there's a specific name for it, but he invented and then was going to patent a device. I guess I don't know if device is the right word.
Syringe.
Well, so what it is like a glass tincture with a sealed lid that you could put a syringe in and pull out what you needed from the syringe. So there's no contact, so it's safe and clean, and then, use it to administer to your patient. And he saw the need for lower risk of contact and of exchanging dangerous like bacteria and viruses and stuff in the transfer of medicine to syringe to patient. Right. So this is actually, I mean, I don't know that this is the patent that's still used to this day, but if you go into a hospital, you're probably going to see one of those. You know what I'm talking about. You're familiar with them, right? Everyone has, I'm sure, at one point or another, seen those glass syringes where, you know, the doctor or nurse or whoever is working with you puts the syringe in, pulls the liquid out, and it's a safe transfer. So he had this idea and created this device, whatever you want to call it, this system, whatever. And but he actually needed someone to partner with him on creating the device itself. And so he partnered up with a guy who actually turned out to be a scam artist who actually went and filed for the patent right out from underneath Harold and never produced the product itself. And then they ended up in a lawsuit in court. You know, Harold actually took him to court to get his patent back, to be reimbursed for all of the money that he and Lillian had put into it.
Yeah.
Because he spent years and a lot of money on developing this himself before he could take it to market. And so this was a huge loss for him emotionally, financially, and, you know, in his career. This was a big loss for him. So he's brilliant. Again, he wrote some papers that are still referenced to this day. And so he did a lot of in-depth medical research. So that's kind of a little bit about his career and his history. So Harold and Lillian, in the years leading up to not only the purchase of the home, but then the murders, which took place in 1959, they had a kind of a rocky path, right? So there were these issues with his career. They were in overwhelming amounts of debt. So, and there were debts for many different things, for schooling for the kids, for material items, for, you know, this lost amount of money that went into these debts.
Well,
so there was a rocky road that they were on.
I think Harold falls into the track that so many Americans fall into, and that is living beyond your means. And he really epitomized the keeping up with the Joneses kind of scenario, because before they move into the Los Feliz murder mansion, they were...
It wasn't yet.
It ends up being...
They made it the Los Feliz murder mansion.
They lived in just an average house. And I think because Harold was this doctor and he was wanting to be shown as being successful. I mean, we see these people even in our industry, Sarah, where we know that, you know, someone's driving around, you know, $150,000, $200,000 vehicle, and you look them up and they're not closing the amount of transactions that they claim that they're closing.
Yeah, sure.
And it's this image of, if I show that I'm successful, I am. And we see that with like influencers and things like that all the time.
Sure.
So.
Well, somebody taught it, the phrase became popularized, like dress for the job you want, or, you know, be the entrepreneur, the person you want to be. But some people took that way too far.
Dress for the job you want, not the job you have or something. I think that was just a justification.
Totally. Welcome to the podcast, Danny.
What happened there?
It happens, though.
You okay?
Yeah.
Walk it off.
I've been trying to clear it out with it.
No, you're good. That happened to me during one episode we were doing, and I was dying. That was back when we were at UCAR.
So many things happened at UCAR.
And or didn't happen.
Yeah.
Like recording. Yeah. Okay. So there's a definite keeping up with the Jones vibe that's going on in this family. And it wasn't only Harold, right? It was Lillian as well, because we did find in some research that they had conflict in their marriage and strife because of
her
spending, as well as their daughter Judy, who was, you know, getting to be an older teenager at that point. So 16, 17, 18 years old.
I laugh every time I hear about like the daughter's spending, because it's like how you can only, a child looks to their parents to kind of, what's acceptable or what's not, or, how did she have the means to go out and spend money?
Yeah.
She wasn't working. She,
Well, she did take a job to help her family financially as the road got harder and harder. I'm not trying to correct you. I'm saying, yeah, I think they lived quite this lavish life beyond their means, like you were saying. And I get what you mean. Like, they were enabling her by being like, fine, here's the credit card.
Yeah, I don't know that Judy should be blamed for financial, I don't know.
Judy was living her best life.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely no shame on Judy. I'm saying it comes up in the research
It totally
that
does.
amongst the adults in the household, there was a lot of conflict about finances.
Yeah. Well, and Lillian, she cracks me up. They move into
Lillian, that girl.
They move into this mansion, and what do you want to do when you first move into a place?
You got to furnish it.
You do. And your stuff, is like, well, this was for this house, but this house really needs, we all do it. We all do it.
Totally.
When you're like, oh, what this room really,
this couch
really
doesn't
needs?
fit anymore.
Yeah. I remember when we moved into our house, we had this little tree that looked fine in our townhouse. But when we moved into our single family house, I was like, oh yeah, that tree's got to go. Like, it looked
what kind
like
of a tree.
It looked like
a Christmas tree?
Yeah, it looked like it was just.
Amy's just hauling trees with her when she moves.
I just dig them up. No, I don't.
So she's got to furnish this furnace. I hope they had a furnace.
Yeah.
She's got to furnish this mansion.
So she went out and bought all this new furniture and probably overindulged. But Harold finds out and gets really, really mad, as one would. But instead, Lillian calls the company that she bought it from and says the furniture was never delivered as a way to try to be like, I need to get my account reimbursed.
Yeah.
So
Lillian, may she rest in peace, is the reason why Amazon drivers have to take a picture at the front door.
I mean, I don't think we can totally blame Lillian, but that's funny.
I'm just saying, it started there.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of financial strife and difficulty, right?
Yeah.
And then in 1957, Judy was driving her vehicle.
I thought it was a family Oldsmobile. I thought she was driving the family car.
Oldsmobile? You're sticking to that?
I don't know what she was driving.
I have no idea, but in the resource that I was listening to, and I listened to multiple podcasts, which were fascinating because some of them took the urban myth route and others were a little bit more factual. But anyway, she was driving a vehicle.
1957. I thought it was the family vehicle, but I don't know. It's fine.
She's in a car. It was one of those Flintstone ones where you have to run underneath it.
No.
We don't know. She was driving her two younger siblings, and they were in an accident that was serious enough that the kids were all physically injured in one way or another.
Well, the driver ran a red light and hit them.
Right. And so Harold took that driver to court in a lawsuit to get their medical bills covered, and then he wanted also like extra financial reward for all of the children. And he ended up barely getting enough. I mean, he was awarded some money because the accident was legitimately the other driver's fault. But again, not enough to cover medical bills, legal bills. And so we've tanked more money now in an already very financially strife situation.
So he was asking $20,000 for each of the girls and only $10,000 for his son, which...
I mean... He was shorter. He needed less care.
And the only thing the family received was enough to cover their medical bills.
Sure. So, and that's in 1957. We know the murder is going to take place in 1959. So, again, this is all build up, right? He's struggled quite a bit very recently in his career, his family, their financial situation. There's a lot of pressure building up.
Well, and then in the 1952 lawsuit with... his last name was Shoestack with the guy
the con artist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Harold filed a $100,000 lawsuit, and then you times that by 10 nowadays. You can get kind of the rough amount, but he only ended up receiving a little less than $24,000. It was $23,956 actually.
Yeah. So
So
a lot of financial loss.
So he has this history of suing it, which costs a lot of money, lawyers,
Mm-hmm.
and then not having the courts rule back in his favor.
Right. And we do know, again, from some deep diving and some research, that as this time in their life is ramping up, again, in Harold's adult life and as a husband and father, he's actually suffering from a pretty severe mental illness. Now, this is back in the 40s and 50s, right? And so there was not nearly the amount of research and understanding and, just medical information about mental illnesses that there are nowadays, of course. So they were extremely, limited compared to what we know now. But he was struggling to the extent that he was institutionalized several times and then put on a pretty, I don't know what the word you want to use to describe it is, but a pretty serious medication, which you had some information on, Amy.
Yeah, so the medication is called Thorazine, and it was actually invented in France in 1950, and it's also called, oh gosh, I don't even know how to pronounce this, chloropromazine. I don't know. Anyway, it's trade. That's the trade name for this
Right.
neuroplectic drug.
Okay.
And it was initially used as an antihistamine or pre-anesthetic agent for surgery. So it was powerful enough that they're using it as an anesthesia for surgery.
Also, that reminds me of like a pharmaceutical commercial that you would see nowadays that's like for a heart disease, right?
Yeah.
And then they're like, also, like, may cause cancer and liver disease and kidney disease. And if you have sneezing or hiccups, don't take this medicine.
Yeah.
Or if you're allergic to sugar, you know what I'm talking about? Like, we're using this medicine for kind of a wide variety of medical purposes.
Yeah, antihistamine and then a pre-anesthetic, like, and
then a psychological
well,
drug.
if it knocks you out, of course it's going to fix your allergies.
Okay,
sir.
which is a good point, though, because if somebody's institutionalized and experiencing, a psychotic break or a severe mental illness, maybe the purpose of the drug is to shut that down so that the person becomes less of a risk to themselves.
Since it's been introduced, it's been used as an antipsychotic drug to treat schizophrenia.
Okay.
Is actually what we're using it now.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first antipsychotic drug, like I mentioned, but it was developed as a tranquilizer. And it was useful in treating psychosis. And it had been found to decrease the symptoms of like hallucinations and delusions and thought disorders.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And we know this because of the medical records that were written that
for his treatments at the hospital. Yeah. So he was in and out of a mental institution is what it was referred to in research. That sounds like a harsh term, but that's what it was referred to.
Well,
he was in and out and really struggling with his mental health. And it was said that Lillian was, up until this day that she was murdered, still very concerned about his mental health and was going to institutionalize him again after the holidays. So
yeah, it sounded like maybe he was institutionalized when he was younger and then only once in his adult life. But
that's 2 more times than you've been institutionalized.
No, I know, but like when we say like in and out, it wasn't like you're in and then you're good for a little bit and then he's back in. Like some people that have to receive treatment, especially, starting from the 70s, 80s, 90s, where you're thinking of like in and out of mental institutions, it wasn't as consistent as...
Well, and it might not have been long term, but some of the neighbors were quoted to say that they were told that Harold was being treated for heart disease and that he would leave for several days at a time to be treated and come back.
Yeah, and then everybody had to be really quiet in the neighborhood when he returned. Could you imagine, like, telling all your neighbors?
If my neighbor tells me to be real quiet because their husband was gone for a few days suspiciously and then came back, I would absolutely follow orders. No problem. We'll stay silent. But the neighbors were quoted as saying that was a multiple occurrence. And so, maybe he
Maybe.
wasn't institutionalized for long periods of time, but either way, he was receiving psychiatric treatment to an extent that was very clear that he was struggling significantly with his mental health, right?
Yeah. And one more financial thing that we had forgotten to mention was that Harold had recently bought a clinic.
Oh, yeah, that's where I was going next.
Or were you?
Yeah, because again, like this is all ramping up, and he made another investment
Yeah.
that caused even more grief and strain financially. So tell us a little bit about the clinic.
Yeah. So when you think of clinic, this isn't just, an office where you just come in and you just are going to get treated after hours. This was more like an Instacare level clinic for here in Utah. I don't know what everybody else has along the country, but it's not quite an ER. I know Sarah's dying laughing because we talk about the deep dive of this, but I'm not going to go into even more deep dive. Sarah.
When we were talking about our information and how we were going to present this episode, Amy gave me a 5-minute lesson on the difference between Instacares and ERs, but it was a fully equipped clinic meant to treat people in medical emergencies.
It's 13 rooms.
Okay.
Total, like, x-ray machines, medications.
Sure.
There's a pharmacy, infant scales. There's an emergency room, like, entrance. Like, it's basically a mini hospital that he bought.
Absolutely. Which I'm sure was a huge investment.
So, yeah, he was supposed to pay a large sum monthly, with every year being like a mass down payment. It ended up being that Maxie Barr ends up kind of filing probate court, like filing a probate claim for like $53,000.
Who's that?
Max Barr, which is the guy that Harold bought the clinic from, the doctor that he bought the clinic from.
Gotcha.
So we know like all of this stuff that was detailed in what this clinic had, because Mr. Barr had to, or Dr. Barr, I'm assuming he was a doctor, had to list everything that was in that purchase. But Lillian and Harold had both signed the contract to buy this clinic.
So again, just significant, large amounts of financial strain. And so as these things have all racked up, we're going to get to December of 1959. Now, according to the urban legend that Steve, the storyteller, told, this murder took place on Christmas Eve, but it actually did not. This murder took place on the evening of December 6th. Actually, it was at 4:30 in the morning, I'll just say. So, I guess depending on what resource you're speaking from, either the night of the 5th or the morning of the 6th. But either way, let's go to the evening before the murder takes place. The family is spending time together in this evening, watching a TV program, as they called it back then, perhaps preparing some Christmas presents and having dinner together. Yes.
I was just going to go in.
You look confused.
Well, no. So there's been some speculation onto what level of Christmas decor or Christmas festivities the family was doing, because the family was Jewish.
Right.
So
right.
That's all I was going to say about that.
So the family was spending time together, and the kids went to bed. Lillian went ahead and went to bed as well, leaving Harold awake doing some reading. So over the span of the next few hours, Harold does not go to sleep at all. He's actually reading a novel called Dante's Inferno, right?
Yes. Have you read that, heard that?
No, Amy. I haven't had time to read Dante's Inferno.
I think we had to read it in one of my classes, either in college or high school. Yeah.
I mean, I'm familiar with what it is. It's a pretty well-known piece of literature that basically goes through kind of the story of
the layers of hell.
Yeah, of hell and heaven, and like going through all of those things as a journey.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's dark, it's drastic, it's, creates a lot of emotion and religious context. Like, it's a complex piece of literature that he was said to be reading that evening.
Which someone that's on the verge of a mental break.
Yeah.
to be reading Dante's Inferno probably wasn't very helpful with the psychosis of, there's a lot of imagery involved in Dante's Inferno.
Sure. And there's no way to know what exactly caused him to take his next actions, but certainly the amount of stress that he was experiencing, which is financial stress is a pretty well-known, widely accepted trigger for, breakdowns, psychosis sometimes. And then, adding these materials and things on top of it. What happens next is at approximately 4:30 in the morning, Harold enters the bedroom that he shares with his wife, Lillian. He has a ball peen hammer with him, and he strikes her on the head, killing her, quickly enough. However, her actual cause of death was asphyxiation. She asphyxiated on her own blood, which is really graphic,
Yeah.
I know, but that's what happened. So he caused a very drastic, severe head injury very quickly.
Well, and from what we've kind of read and heard, and it wasn't multiple, like when he bludgeoned her the first time, it was, she didn't wake up. It was, and
Right.
and I think he thought she was dead by just one blow, but she didn't actually die from
the injury directly. It was from asphyxiation, but caused by. And so he leaves his room. He leaves Lillian and actually enters the bedroom of his teenage daughter, Judy, and begins to strike her on the head with the hammer as well. Now, Judy wakes up as this attack is happening, and she is cognizant enough to realize what's happening. She sits up and screams, "Stop, don't kill me, stop." And Harold simply replies to her, "Lay still, keep quiet."
Yeah.
So
Which
he's
is
clearly
so creepy.
in a state of mind that is undescribable, right? It's got to be horrific. Judy is able to escape, and she's screaming, running out of the house. It wakes up the other two children, who, fortunately, by the grace of something, Harold did not attack the two younger children.
In fact, he told them to go back to bed.
So they came out into the hallway wondering what's going on, and he told them, "This is just a nightmare. Go back to bed."
Yeah, can you imagine?
But for whatever reason, I mean, kind of the way that I would envision it happening, of course I wasn't there, but Judy's screaming and escaping might have broken kind of the state that he was in, because he doesn't then go even attempt to kill his other children. What happens from there is he goes back into his bedroom, goes into the master bathroom, and he takes 2 doses of Nembutal and 31 small white pills that were listed as anything from codeine to tranquilizers. There was a blend of medication that he took. Very powerful stuff, very quickly, high doses.
Well, and if anyone's familiar with Nembutal, that's the same drug that killed Marilyn Monroe.
Yes, yeah. But it has come up. It's a dangerous drug in high toxic amounts, and it has been known to cause death, which is why he took it, and he took 2 doses. So he actually dies very quickly. So he completes suicide, and he dies before the ambulance and the police even arrive on scene. So the neighbors heard Judy screaming. She runs out of the house. They're actually, the neighbor is awake and outside now, wondering what's going on with the screaming. He, calls 911 on behalf of Judy, enters the house to try and put a stop to whatever's going on. He sees that Judy has these head injuries and she's screaming that her father's trying to kill her. And so he goes to try to intervene or help out. But, he's the one that calls 911. And when they arrive there are already 2 dead people inside this house.
What's crazy, though, is Judy ran to a neighbor's house and they heard it and didn't open the door.
That's right. Yeah, she did go pound on another door. And it's 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. Honestly, I might not hear my door, although it is referenced in one of the materials that I listened to that the neighbor opened the door and then shut it. It was very shocking, I'm sure.
I'm not sure that the neighbor actually opened. I just know that Like, it just seemed like they knew her. They knew the scream, but they weren't quite sure who it was because of the
Sure.
amount of blood that was covered. And so I think the neighbor has since said that they've like regretted that not opening. But anyway, another neighbor went. But
It's alarming. Like, it
I
would
think
be
it's
alarming.
amazing that Judy had the wherewithal to run out. She has a severe head injury. We know that she was at least hit once, if not more,
Multiple times, yeah.
with a hammer. And we're not talking just like a regular hammer. It's those old, like the ones that have like the ball at the end.
Yeah, a
like,
ball peen hammer. So it's like rounded. It doesn't have the two forks off the back.
Yeah.
It's rounded. They're very heavy.
They are. And so the
Mhm.
amount of damage that is done is very centralized.
Yeah. So she's definitely brave. From there on out, the children are sent to live with family members. They are still, as it's known, at least today, the children are still alive. Judy is very serious about her privacy and doesn't want to be bothered or spoken to about the story, which is completely understandable. That part of her life she wants left behind, so she stays out of the media. She doesn't get involved in the urban legends, the myths, the storytelling.
Yeah.
She wants her privacy respected, which is absolutely understandable. But from here on out, the family, the children are sent to live elsewhere, and the Perelson family, as we know it, ceases to exist inside their home, the Los Feliz Murder Mansion.
So it was put up on the market, and it was on the market for a really, really long time. And because of the amount of debt and financial situations that were happening, when someone dies, even now, it has to go through a probate court. And so it's written up in the newspaper, so all the creditors have an opportunity to come and plead kind of their case. And obviously at the time, looking at all their financial documents, the Perelsons owed more people than they were able to like have in their estate. But Maxie Barr ends up doing something that I don't think a lot of people saw coming, because he ends up settling for a lot less to actually let the kids have some money from the estate, because they lost both their parents and their whole life is turned upside down. They don't want the house. So, and I don't know that they would have been able to financially keep it anyway, but
Right.
Judy neighbors had said that Judy had never liked the house to begin with. And so there was all these things that kind of were happening with the estate and the family, and it sits for a really long time. And this is a very affluent neighborhood, and there has been some reference to like discrimination within families being able to kind of enter into these more affluent areas. But because the house sat for so long, the Enriquez family, who were also immigrants from, I think, Mexico.
Yeah. And they were an affluent family.
They were. They had to been
very financially well off, it's noted.
to purchase this house, but they end up buying the property in 1960, and they didn't purchase the house for very much. Do you have the amount?
I don't have the amount, but it said, they purchased it, but didn't necessarily live there full time, or not all of the family lived there full time.
Rumor had it from the neighbors that they never moved in.
Right. A part of the urban legend, though, is that the house sat vacant because in part of the research that's been done on this story, Rudy Enriquez, who's the son of, the parents that purchased the property, actually was willing to be interviewed and spoke about the home at length, and said that ultimately his parents gifted him the house, but he didn't want to live there. So he used it as more of a storage location. He let some friends live there off and on when they would fall on hard times. He also let friends store things there. It said that he had cats that he kept there. And so by all accounts, if, neighbors are coming and going during certain times of the day or the evening, maybe they're not seeing him coming and going, and the neighbors are under the assumption that the house is vacant. And though it's not actively being lived in, the house was owned. And the items that were being seen and that are seen to this day. Now, I should mention nowadays, you can't just sneak up on the property. There's actual, signs, no trespassing. The neighbors have been very clear in getting, permission from the city to turn people away. And so when you see like YouTube videos and clips or, whatever online source it is of people sneaking up to the house, they're not actually able to get close to it anymore. But the things that our storyteller friend, Stephen, were seeing and were telling other people that they were seeing would have at that point been belongings of the Enriquez family.
Well, also, it was, they bought the furniture and personal belongings of the Perelsons, and it was Julian and Amelia Enriquez. And remember, the Perelsons bought the house for $30,000. It appraised for $45,000. They bought the house sold for $44,750, but that included all the furniture and personal
because
belongings.
no one wanted it, and they just needed to unload the debt. And so, the trustee or whoever was taking care of it was, here's one purchase price. This property belongs to you.
Yeah, and
that's not that unusual.
In the early 2000s, when people were sneaking into the house and looking at all the things, I mean, Judy's light plate that was in her room that said Judy, that looked or appeared that there was still blood on the light plate, was still hanging on the wall in place of where the light plate would be.
You're talking about a light switch plate.
Yeah.
So all of the kids had a custom one that was painted with their name on it, and Judy's was still found there. I'm not saying all of the things were removed from the home, but from the time that the Enriquez family bought it in 1960 to all the way in 2000, when Stephen's seeing it, items have been exchanged in and out of the house quite a bit. Like, I'll throw back all the way earlier, I mentioned that people said they saw copies of Life magazine and cans of SpaghettiOs.
Playboy magazine was there too in the 50s.
Sure, but SpaghettiOs weren't.
Yeah. No,
so
for sure.
Those items did not belong to the Perelsons. And so, that's really the reality of it, is that Rudy himself was willing to be interviewed and speak to people about the actual truth of the property, as opposed to the urban legend and the myth that we shared with you.
Well, and Rudy explained that there wasn't a Christmas tree. If you look up there, Steve had made the whole Christmas tree up and wanted to see like if people saw it, and he would be like, "Oh, did you see the Christmas tree?" And if they said, "I didn't see a Christmas tree," he's like, "Oh, you didn't sit long enough."
Yeah, he used it to mess with people.
Yeah, but there was Christmas wrapping, which Rudy ends up saying later, "Oh, I used that room to wrap some presents and I just left the wrapping on the floor."
Right. So Rudy has since passed away, actually. And the home is now going to go through a new series of issues being bought and sold. So do we want to kind of start to wrap it up by telling you the since then part of the story?
Yeah, from the post 2009.
The post Enriquez era. Yeah. So in 2016, an attorney by the name of Lisa Bloom and her husband Brandon Pollock bought the home at a probate sale for $2.3 million. So this would have been after Rudy passed away. The house had been left to him from his parents. So now he's passed away. This house is in a probate sale, which maybe we'll talk about that sometime on an episode, how probate works and trusts when someone passes away. But this house is put up for auction, and Lisa and her husband Braden, and there's one other couple. So only two couples show up to the auction to purchase this home. Lisa and Braden purchased the home for $2.3 million. Lisa Bloom, by the way, is the daughter of infamous women's rights attorney and, advocate Gloria Allred.
Oh, interesting.
And so they purchased the home. They have all these plans with it. Lisa actually is quoted as saying that it didn't bother her at all, that it was a haunted house or a murder house, that she didn't believe in any of that, like, energy staying there and bothering her. And so they had all these great plans with the home. And unfortunately, they hit just roadblock after roadblock with the city, who stopped their construction plans every time they went to permit something. And a great deal of it, from what I understand, had to do with the slope of the home and the piece of the property itself, because you're on a hillside. And when the home was originally constructed in 1920, pretty sure their engineering strategy
Yeah.
was a little different than the requirements today. Especially, we know that, California in general and in specific areas of California are hotbeds for earthquakes, for, you know,
Well, and
natural
California
disaster.
is known to overcomplicate everything, and
California, don't come for us.
no.
Her
I'm
name
just
is Amy Brockbank.
The regulations, a lot of the things that are happening across the country, with car paint or whatever, is because the regulations in California are just so tight. So it makes sense that also the housing, they are tight on
Sure. Yeah.
their code system is what I'm
Right.
trying to say.
Yeah, and you're literally living in a hillside. And so eventually it just became too much of a hassle for them. They decided just to sell it. They weren't going to be able to do anything with it at that point except scrap the entire thing, level the property, and they'd already purchased it for $2.3 million. It makes zero financial sense to purchase an asset for $2.3 million and then level
I'm
it.
just shocked that it's not part of like some historical, preservation. I don't know, something, because it's built in 1920. Like this house, like for LA County to just be like, okay, well, you can just demolish it if you want. Like I don't know. It was just shocking when I heard that part
but
of
it
the
was
story.
privately owned right after the murder for, how many years? The Enriquez family bought it in 1960.
Yeah.
Rudy died,
Well, it didn't sell till 2016.
right. That's what I
so,
mean.
Yeah.
So there's a significant amount of time. So if it were to be desired to be a historical property, I would think someone would have to come in with that specific intention.
Yeah. Well, I was just stating that I was surprised that LA County, like, just that was their solution. We'll just
Sure.
demo it.
So Lisa and Braden just sold it to a developer for $2.35 million. So right about what they purchased it for, although they did lose a lot of time, effort, and money
Yeah.
in the meantime. However, the developer had all these great plans for it, and he and his company put out these plans and wanted to show the community, like, this is what we're going to do with this fantastic home. And nothing ever happens with it. I'm sure he hit the same roadblocks or similar ones. Either way, it sits there completely vacant still. Nothing can be done to it. It's been basically stripped to the studs between Lisa and Braden and now this developer. Like, the home's been gutted essentially at this point. And between all this time, again, keep in mind, like, this urban legend, this myth has been rolling for over 20 years now. In 2023, this developer allows one group of people to actually legally enter the home and film inside the home. And that is Zach Bagans and his TV show, his team, Ghost Adventures. And so they go looking for haunted properties.
But by
and
this
they
time, it's
film in
only
there.
down to the studs. Like, all of the character of the house has kind of been
Sure. And I mean, you
removed.
can go watch the episode. It's definitely a little bit creepy. However, the ghosts in this home don't really care about the aesthetics of it. They're happy to haunt it, whether it's studs or not. So, they film an episode there and then they leave. So, however, the home has been seen in public one more time since then. And that's it. And like I said, you can't just walk up to this home now. The neighborhood is trying to protect it from becoming a, like, what do you call it? Like a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
Right. So, actually in 2020, between 2020 and 2022, this house was filmed and then appeared on a TV show called Buying Beverly Hills, and it's on Netflix. So I went and found this episode so I could watch it. It's episode 6 in the first season, and listing agent John Groman of The Agency, which is the name of the real estate firm, The Agency, visits the property at 2475 Glendower Place with another agent named Brandon Graves. There they meet with a renowned architect by the name of Richard Landry. And you can see, like, on this episode there, this part of the episode is maybe only 5 minutes, but these two agents meet with Richard Landry. who is the architect that renovated Sharon Tate's house. Now, Sharon Tate, if you're not familiar, was the pregnant actress, I will say, who was murdered along with several other people in her house by the Manson family back in the 1960s.
Yeah.
So this architect has renovated stigmatized murder homes before, if you will. So they meet briefly and they talk about their plans to remodel the home. From what they say on this TV show, the proposed square footage of this 5-bedroom, 7-bathroom home would now be over 9,000 square feet. So they're going to enlarge the home. And the listing price is estimated to be around $5.5 million. Now, that was in, 2022-ish. It's 2024. I haven't seen any update. The home doesn't appear anywhere else. That's the last trace of it that we have. So this house is still, again, haunted, if you will, by a looming past of not wanting to be purchased by buyers, not being able to be lived in, not wanting to be lived in over and over and over again.
And to go back to the history of the land, too.
Yeah, that the
curse.
The curse that was put on land. We talk about that in part 1, so make sure you listen to that part first. But yeah, you're right. Maybe it is cursed. And this home is over 100 years old now and still sits vacant on the hill in Los Filos. So that's the Los Filos mansion murder story.
It's crazy. I did have a friend of mine who knew that I was researching for this house. And he had said, there's a property that you need to look at. Like, I'm pretty sure this property is haunted.
Oh,
and so
here in Utah?
It's in Orem. And so I'll just put that out to our audience. If there's any cases or properties that you think we should deep dive, message us.
Look, there are several in Utah that I know of off the top of my head that would be interesting to talk about sometime that we just need to be able to gather more information on. But we also talk about stigmatized properties in part 1, so definitely listen to that. But before we wrap it up, let's do a couple things, Amy.
Okay.
Let's do our takeaways because we always do a takeaway at the end. Oh, Amy wasn't prepared. Her eyeballs just popped out of her head.
I forgot
what your takeaway was.
You do?
Exercise is not that beneficial. Killed Richard Simmons. Gene Simmons is still alive.
No, I guess my takeaway would be that just research what's your house. What's going on with your house.
Or don't.
Yeah. I mean,
it depends on what you want to know.
I think there's a lot of fact from fiction, in this. When I tell my clients all the time, the best resource of information when you're trying to find out about your house or neighborhood isn't necessarily the seller's disclosures. I tell them, go talk to the neighbors, circle the neighborhood and just ask questions because nobody knows more about your house than their neighbors, that want to talk about, oh my gosh, guess what happened in this house?
So true.
But as we found out, the neighbors in this area didn't even know that there was a family that had bought it and lived in it, So,
right. Yeah, good point.
Anyway, do your research. I guess that's my takeaway.
Okay, cool. So my takeaway really is, I just realized doing all of the research onto this one specific home that has now become infamous, that every house has a story, really.
Yeah.
And as realtors, I mean, we're showing homes to potential buyers and walking through homes that we're going to list for our sellers all the time. I was just with clients this weekend in a small kind of secluded little town that was really lovely, tucked back in there in the mountains. And these clients of mine that are going to sell this property have been there for 25 years. And we talked about the history of that home because I found it to be a little more interesting now to find out kind of what makes the home and what makes the story. So, I mean, if only walls could talk, right?
Yeah.
All right, that's my takeaway. We are back to talking about murder, right?
We are back to talking about murder.
Okay. Amy?
All right.
Don't go exercise.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye, everybody.